to go back to climate change for a moment and the attempts to transit to renewable energy, one of the great threats, actually, if we're not really careful in how we do it, is that the comfortable Western world will engage in policy formation of a sort which stops and reverses the progress in lifting people out of poverty, for the simple reason that available, affordable energy is critical to people in the developing world being able to get out of poverty and sustain, a full belly. My question is, how does reason cope with the fact that sometimes we are so blind to reason?
Yes. So reason can deal with anything. That's the power of reason. You can always, if people are being irrational or unreasonable, you can always use reason to analyze that, to step up a level, to look at the application of reason, find out what's wrong with it, and diagnose it, and do your best to come up with workarounds or solutions. So it isn't a failure of reason in general, though it might be a failure of how you're thinking about that very problem. So indeed, when it comes to climate, and I tend to agree that it's been badly conceived by people who could only think of how we reduce emissions, period. The problem being that emissions are, they are threatening because they could lead to terrible disruptions down the line. On the other hand, they are also good things if they allow people to deploy energy to grow food, to get to work, to make stuff, to make their lives better now. And so the way to analyze the problem is not just getting emissions down to zero. That could be easy. Just go back to the Middle Ages. Or actually, it's not so easy because no one wants to go back to the Middle Ages. But it's misconceiving the problem. The problem is, how do we enjoy the benefits of energy? And you can't do anything without energy without the possibly horrendous costs of climate change. So that reconceives the problem. It is, you can't turn off coal and oil today because people would starve and poor people would stay poor, and they're going to refuse. They're not going to stay poor.
And it'll produce an environmental disaster, sorry to interrupt for a moment, in itself. I mean, people who can't feed their families are hardly going to be concerned about the environment. And there would be an awful lot of people in that category who could do catastrophic damage.
Indeed. Is gas, is methane a transition? Well, it probably is better than just burning a lot of coal because methane has much less carbon. On the other hand, methane leaks are themselves a threat to the climate. And so if we're going to use gas, we've got to tighten the restrictions on leaks and transport. So what someone like our own former President Donald Trump did which is relax all of the regulations on methane pipelines and storage is insane. It's the last thing you want to do if you want to actually use methane as a transition from coal and oil on the one hand to zero carbon energy sources in the future. But that's a bit of a digression. In general, what you need to do when you realize that the problem is not just eliminating emissions, but eliminating emissions and lifting people out of poverty and not sinking back into poverty. If the problem is how do we trade those off, how do we achieve both, then it changes your focus. The focus is then on, first of all, on developing carbon-free, abundant, scalable, and affordable sources of energy, of which I myself believe that the nuclear is right up there. I mean, together with new forms of storage for the intermittent energy from renewables like solar and wind, which by themselves can't power an economy because they don't run 24/7. The innovation that gives us abundant energy that is cheaper than abundant clean energy that's cheaper than dirty energy is really what we should be aiming for. Because then people doing what's in their own interests, namely to capture as much energy as possible, as cheaply as possible, will also do what's best for humanity and for the planet. So that may also involve a thumb on the scale of carbon taxation so that people pay for the damage they do by burning fossil fuels. And that's just a basic principle of economics. You get less bad stuff if you force people to pay for the bad stuff that they do. It also accelerates the transition because without any planner having to decide exactly how much energy we should allow here versus there, if there's a tax on carbon based on how much damage it does, then millions of people will make decisions toward the cheapest energy source, which will be tilted away from carbon if there's carbon taxation. And that will accelerate the transition to nuclear, to renewables plus storage, and with possibly with methane as a transition.